So I first need to talk about the difference between metric and English units. All right. The reason for this is that in our day-to-day lives, we generally don't use the metric system a whole lot. All right. If you were to go out and ask somebody, how long is something, at least if you're talking to an American, the units that they're going to use are going to be inches, maybe feet, yards, or even miles. Okay. And the reason for that is those are English units, and those are the units that we use typically in this country. Whenever you're talking about units in science, we don't use English units, all right? We always use metric units, okay? So for instance, if you need to know how long something is, the base unit that you're going to use for that is a meter. In this country, when you're talking about volume, right, you're going to be talking about things like pints, quarts, and gallons, all right? In the metric system, when you're talking about volume, the unit is going to be liter, all right? Whenever you abbreviate liter, it's going to be a capital L. One more important property is this thing called mass. We're going to talk a little bit more about mass when we get to some basic chemistry. But right off the bat, there's no real English unit for mass. The metric unit for mass is going to be a gram. Whenever you abbreviate it, it's going to be lowercase g. And the one last property that I'm going to talk about right now is temperature. Right? In this country, if you needed to know what the temperature is outside, you're going to be talking about degrees Fahrenheit, which we abbreviate this way. In the metric system, there's actually two different units that you can use for temperature. One is this thing right here. That is called degrees Celsius. The other would be just a capital K, all right? And that is what's called Kelvin, all right? We'll get into what these are in a little bit. This is just a very brief overview of the difference between metric and English units. Another important difference between the English system and the metric system for units is that in the metric system, you end up using these things called metric prefixes. So I'm going to start this with the most commonly used prefixes to get you oriented to this concept. All right. The most commonly used prefixes in the metric system are kilo and milli. All right. Anytime you use the word kilo, it means 1,000 times greater than whatever base unit you're using. All right. Whenever you're using the prefix milli, it means 1,000 times less than the base unit that you're using, all right? And what I mean by base unit is the metric unit for the property that you're using, all right? So for instance, if you're talking about volume, the base unit would be liter. If you're talking about mass, the base unit would be gram, all right? So if you wanted to make a unit which was 1,000 times greater than a gram, it would be a kilogram. All right. If you had a certain amount of a substance which was 1,000 times less than a gram, it would be a milligram. Okay. What if we were talking about something other than mass? What if we were talking about distance? All right. Well, the base unit for distance is meter. Okay. What if you had some distance which was 1,000 times larger than a meter? It would be a kilometer, okay? If you had something which was 1,000 times less than a meter, it would be a millimeter, okay? So to give you a little bit of a visual on what some of these metric prefixes look like, the amount of water that's in this container here is 1 liter, okay? But obviously, it's possible to have less water than the amount of water that's in this container right here. The amount of water that's in this little syringe right here is 1,000 times less than the amount of water that was in that container. So if we wanted to say, okay, how much water is in this syringe right here, one way we could say it is 0.001 liters, okay? Because this right here is 1,000 times less than this amount right here. But this is where these prefixes come into use, all right? If this is 1,000 times less than a liter, then we should just be able to put this prefix on the front of the word, and then you'd have exactly one of that unit, okay? So this right here is the same as 1 milliliter. So what you're going to have to do with these metric prefixes is to be able to do what's called metric conversions, all right? And to do this, I've made this little thing, I call it the metric ladder. Okay. So let's start with a little orientation to this metric ladder. Okay. The most important block that you're going to have to be familiar with is the one that says base unit right here. Okay. Base unit can mean any of the metric units, all right? For example, this could be a meter. It could also be a liter if you're talking about volume. If you're talking about mass, it could be grams, okay? But every time that you're doing a metric conversion, you're going to have to be familiar with this particular step on the ladder, okay? The way the ladder works is that the smaller bars are for prefixes that are smaller than the base unit. For example, a millimeter is smaller than a meter, okay? The bars that are longer than the base unit are for prefixes of units that are larger than the base unit. For instance, a kilometer is longer than a meter. One important thing is that the exact length of one of these bars does not exactly correspond to the relative sizes of them, but it is true to say that the smaller one of these bars is, the smaller that prefix corresponds to. For instance, a micrometer is always going to be smaller than a millimeter, all right? A millimeter is always going to be smaller than a centimeter. A kilometer is going to be smaller than a megameter, okay? The reason that the sizes of these bars are not exactly proportional to what the meanings of their prefixes are is that it would be impossible to represent that much difference in sizes on this sheet of paper. The way this works is that every step is a factor of 10 times. Okay? So if you wanted to know how much different a kilo something was from the base unit, you would have to realize that this step is 10 times greater than the base unit. One more step would be 10 times greater than the previous one, and one more step would be 10 times greater than that. So if you wanted to know how much greater a kilo something is from the base unit, you would say 10, 100, 1,000. Every step is going to correspond to adding one more zero to the factor that is the relationship between that prefix and the base unit. This will make more sense when you see examples of how it's used. When you're going down, you're going to a factor of 10 times less. So, how big is a milli something compared to a base unit? Well, this would be 10 times less. One more would be 100 times less. One more than that would be 1,000 times less. So here are a couple ways that you can use this metric ladder. Let's say you wanted to know how many times larger is a centimeter than a millimeter. Okay? First of all, how do we know that a centimeter is greater than a millimeter? Okay? Just take a look at the relative sizes of the bars. Okay? The centi is this long, the milli is this long. Okay? So which makes more sense? Is a centi something bigger or smaller than a milli something? Okay? Since the bar is larger for centi, that means the centi something is larger. Okay? So how much larger? Okay? What you do there is you count the steps. Okay? Every step is a factor of 10. So, in going from milli to centi, let's count the steps. 1. Okay? So, that means that is a factor of 10 larger. So that means a centimeter is 10 times larger than a millimeter. Another way that you can say that is that if a centimeter is 10 times larger than a millimeter, then a millimeter is 10 times smaller than a centimeter, okay? Because it's a factor of 10 larger if you go in this direction. It's a factor of 10 smaller if you go in the opposite direction. Let's do another example. How many times larger is a megameter than a centimeter? Okay? Well, first of all, let's locate the prefixes. A centimeter is right here. A megameter is right here. How do we know that a megameter is bigger than a centimeter? Well, take a look at the relative lengths. Mega is this big, centi is this big. So, which is larger? Obviously, megameter. Okay. So, how many times larger? Let's count the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So, a way of doing that is just to add a 0 to every step. That would be 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million. Okay? So a way of saying this is that a megameter is 100 million times larger than a centimeter. Okay? One way to make sure that you get this factor correct is that there should be just as many zeros in this number as there are steps between them. Okay? So if I count the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there should be 8 zeros in this number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so let's do one more example. Okay, let's do micrometer versus a meter. Okay, micrometer is going to be the one down here. There's that prefix. Meter, all right, there's no prefix in front of it. That means that it's a base unit. Okay, so you're going to be comparing from here to here. So we want to know how many times smaller is a micro something than the base unit. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That means that a micrometer is 1 million times smaller than a meter. Okay? Another way of saying that is that a meter is 1 million times larger than a micrometer. Okay? So you can use this factor to go either way, either explaining how many times larger one unit is than the other, or how many times smaller the other unit is from the previous one. Okay, so one quick topic before we move on further is unit abbreviations. Okay, when we're writing about centimeters, millimeters, kilograms, any type of metric unit that has a prefix with it, you don't usually write out the word. All right, you usually write out an abbreviation for that unit, and there's a pretty simple way to go about making these abbreviations. The rule is, in order to make an abbreviation for a unit, combine the prefix abbreviation with the base unit abbreviation. For all the prefixes that we've been talking about, there's a one-letter abbreviation that stands for that prefix. Okay? For instance, if you use the word mega, the one-letter abbreviation is a capital M. Kilo is a lowercase k, centi is C, milli is M, and micro, although we don't use it a lot, is this Greek letter which is called mu. The base units also have abbreviations. Meter we've talked about before, its abbreviation is a lowercase m. Liter is an uppercase L. Gram is a lowercase g. There's a lot more units for properties that we haven't talked about here, but just keep in mind that it's going to work the same way. Anytime you want to make an abbreviation, you just combine one of these letters with one of these letters. So let's give it an example of how this works. Okay? Let's say we wanted to come up with an abbreviation for milliliter. When you look at this, you need to be able to recognize that it's comprised of two parts. A prefix, which is milli, along with a base unit, which is liter. Okay? Milli is lowercase m. Okay? Liter is an uppercase L. Alright? And you just combine these two letters without any space between, and that's the abbreviation for the unit. Okay? If you wanted to abbreviate milliliter, it would be ml, as it's written here. Centimeter. Centi is C. Meter is a lowercase m. Gram, notice this is something which is just a base unit. There's no prefix in front of this. Okay? So, anytime you have a situation like this, you abbreviate it just with the letter of the base unit. Okay? Gram, the abbreviation is G. If you saw G all by itself, that would just stand for gram. Kilogram, kilo is K. Gram is G. Alright? kg. Megameter. Okay? Notice that there's two of these prefixes that start with the letter M, milli and mega. The way that you're going to do the difference in the abbreviations is with the case. Okay? So, mega is an uppercase M. Okay? Meter is a lowercase m. In contrast to this, let's say we were doing millimeter. Okay? Millimeter, the prefix for milli is a lowercase m. Meter is also a lowercase m. So notice the difference between these. The way that you tell this is megameter is that's uppercase m with the lowercase m, and that this is millimeter because this is a lowercase m. A liter, again, This is one of those where it's just the base unit by itself, so you would abbreviate that with L. So this is a fairly simple concept. You just take the abbreviation for the prefix and combine it with the abbreviation for the unit. If you need to know the abbreviations for these prefixes, you don't need to go back to this sheet. Notice that on the metric ladder, written next to all of the prefixes in parentheses is the abbreviation that it stands for. Okay, so kilo is the lowercase k, milli is the lowercase m, mega is the uppercase M.